Hello, everyone. I trust you are in good health during this difficult time. Welcome back to the introduction to economics, this second session. Uh, During this session, we are going to discuss about the main problem of economy that are facing by many societies and many governments, and how the policy should respond to those challenges. You see here, the main problem of economy is what we call it as a distribution. A distribution is a huge responsibility. If you see this a trolley, this trolley actually represents the bunch of resources that are inside the trolley. In order to make it a good policy, all those resources has to be distributed equally, proportionally, and all those resources has to be available within the trolley. That's an illustration. If you see that bread, drinks, cookies, vegetables, fruits, everything are inside the trolley. But the question is how those resources has to be distributed, whether the distribution is equal or no, whether the distribution is proportional or no. That's the main problem. That's why the government or society has to have what we call governance, control, and development. Governance means the regulations, the way and how those resources has to be distributed and for whom has to be regulated. And all societies have to understand that kind of regulation. And control. Control means if resources are limited and how to distribute within those limitations. And if the resources are so big, and how to make it available and equal to everybody. And the last is development. In order to have a good economic policy and solve the problem, what we understand is that these resources need to be developed so it will increase in times to times in order to available to each individual within the society. So if we see here, there are two main problems that are facing by the government and by the societies. What we call as a short-term problem and what we call it as a long-term problem. Short-term problem is a stabilization. Every government has to deal with, stabilization of inflation, unemployment, and imbalance of payments. Because this is an everyday a problem. You know, the increase of price of products that's called inflation. That's happen every day, every week, every month. Unemployment as well, also happen every day, especially during this pandemic and uncertainty situation. People might lose a job, in a days, in weeks, in balance on payment as well. So government has to think in order to solve this kind of a stabilization. What we call as a long-term problem is a growth of economy. Every society wants to have an economic growth because it might provide a prosperity and enough wealth for individual. But in order to achieve those growth, society or government have to understand that this kind of growth, is very much influenced by population growth, the increase of production capacity, and the availability of investment. That's why, in order to solve the growth problem, population of growth has to be understand, has to be whether control or whether lose it. You know, society within large number of population understand very well about this problem, like China, India, and Indonesia. That's why you have to have a policy in order to deal with this population growth. An increase of production capacity as well. This is providing, with employment, providing with a product that are accessible for large number of societies, and availability of investment because it might help the production capacity. If you see, this is the GDP growth of countries in the world, developing countries, advanced economies, and the world as a whole. If you see, the graphic every year are change, and this kind of changes actually is not happen, uh, it's not happen gradually, it's not happen without the influence of different factors. It has affected by complexity of social, political, and economic aspects. That's why, in order to understand the graphic and try to increase the GDP growth, the government has to understand the policies, especially the long-term problem of economy. And this is the examples of problem are available and faced by every countries in the world, not only developing and poor countries, but also advanced or developed economies. Poverty and underdevelopment, rapid growth of population, unemployment, inflation, market value, equal distribution, and lately the pandemic and or natural disaster. Let's see poverty and underdevelopment, for example. This problem, especially in the poor and developing economies, has caused by low income, low productivity, lack of human resources, low investment, and in the end resulted to the low savings. you know uh, Talk about productivity, for example. Productivity means the ability of society in producing stuff, production, and then they sell the product and get revenue from that. Normally people with society with agricultural sector, uh, I believe might having a much problem in poverty and underdevelopment, because they still relying on a very agricultural aspect of production. That's why many countries are moving to industry, but it's not, even though it's not true 100%, because like country like Australia is relying heavily on agriculture and they are very successful in that terms. But broadly speaking, that low productivity is very important in terms of poverty and underdevelopment. Lack of human resources, that's why the importance of education, healthcare, and many aspects that influence of the quality of individual. Low investment, and in the end low saving. This is an example of country like India, slum area, or still, we can see in many places in India. India is a huge country with 1.3, if I'm not mistaken, billion population. This is Jakarta, our own country. We are still having this kind of picture, not only just in Jakarta, but also in many big cities in Java and even in outer island. This is Hong Kong in 2017. We see this Hong Kong has been portrayed as a successful city state, but if you see this kind of a small apartment, a part of a slum areas that represented the poverty in countries like Hong Kong, and even rich country like Australia. This is in Melbourne, where homeless still part of the problem, whether society's problem or government's a problem. We can see this kind of picture not only in Melbourne, but also big cities like Sydney, Brisbane, and Perth. This is France in Paris, the capital of the country, also has this slum area, especially where many immigrants are living. And this is New York. Homeless also part of the pictures. If you see in 2015, poverty rate in the United States also still quite high, even high even in some cities are higher than Indonesia actually. If you see the picture here, Los Angeles has among the higher rate of poverty, 8.0%. Another problem or facing by society is rapid growth of population. Why population is very important? because it might influence, the ability for the state in creating an economic growth, employment and unemployment. If you see the positive of, result has might cause from the income growth if it exceeds the rate of population growth. So if the income growth is higher and faster than the population, that's a positive and might result in a very productive economic income. But if the population growth is faster than an income growth, that's might result in negative uh, uh, you know uh, aspect of societies. That's why many countries want to have a policy in dealing with such a rapid growth of population or immigration. For example, they try to increase the investment. Or some countries, like Indonesia, which has been implemented during 70s, 80s, 90s, especially under the new order government, the government implemented what they call child restriction or keluarga berencana in order to reduce the uncontrolled uh, high increase of a population. Uh, this is refugees from Syria who traveled from their hometown to many countries in Europe. Migration already a problem within themselves because of the difficulties of their living in their hometown in the Middle East, but also this cause, but this is also might cause a problem to many countries in Europe. Also, problem faced by Australia, where many migration, migrant uh, societies, many people who travel from South Asia and Southeast Asia in order to find a new place in Australia. Another problem is unemployment. Unemployment is also can be short and also can be long term a problem. The consequence of a poor economy, especially the policies of the government, has been, contributed to the large number of unemployment, especially how the economy being regulated, how the distribution of wealth to whom and who can access the natural resources. This kind of economic governance affected, the employment and unemployment. If the amount of goods or products proceed, the amount of demand might also result in the number of unemployment. And if the country or the government are unable to deal with huge number of unemployment, this is not just an economic problem but also social and political problem, because people might get angry with frustration with the difficult in economy, and might result in the big demonstration rally. That's we've seen this kind of picture in our neighbor country like Malaysia. This is the picture in 2016 where people gathered because Malaysia has been facing an economic problem for the last 5 years because of corruption, because of political freedom, and many other social and economic problems. This later on resulted to the defeat of UMNO in the 2018 election. Another problem is inflation. Inflation, we have to understand that different kind of inflation. There is a normal inflation, but there is also an abnormal inflation. 10% is still understandable, because product and activities of people might cause to the increased price of a product. For example, if you buy something last 5 years ago and now the price is increased, it could be normal if the increase is less than 10% in every year. Uh, but it could be moderate if the price increase is between 10 to 30% and become quite heavy if the increase is more than 30% and less than 100%. But what we are worried about is the inflation could be exceeded or over 100%. That's hyperinflation. That's a serious problem for every society. We've seen that situation during 1998 Asian financial crisis, where many countries in Asia are facing an economic turmoil because of the inflation. At the time before the crisis, $1 uh, was equal to 2,000 rupiah, but only a couple of weeks and months, rupiah to $1 were increased to 15,000 rupiah. That's a huge changes in only a couple of weeks. That's we call a hyperinflation. As a result of that, people are angry, people are demanding the responsibility of the government, and then it leads to the collapse of Suharto's new order regime. That's why every society, every stakeholders, every government wants to address, those economic problems by creating a policies. We can identify an objective of the government by, this kind of instruments. For example, economic efficiency. This is the government tried to use a limited resources, but tried to achieve a bold result. Economic growth, this is the idea of each country wants to have in the long term, because economic growth might provide a prosperity for society. Economic stability also very important because it might help reducing inflation, and also the ability of the country to manage the income, to manage the saving, and can be distributed to many sectors of the society. And lastly, and very important, is equal distribution. This is still a big issue that facing all countries in the world. If you remember, in 2014, for example, a professor, economic professor, Thomas Piketty, published a book called A Capital in 21st Century. He was talking about the equal distribution, which or everywhere in this, where every country is facing this kind of an unequal distribution. So the main problem of unequal distribution is that the government should or should not intervene the economic activities in order to, provide the equal income or proportional distribution of wealth among societies. If you see here that the policy of the government has to understand what the problem are and what the policy should be created in order to deal with those a problem. I think that's a future discussion for now. Uh, Thank you very much for participation. See you next time.